When a liberal judge quietly blocked the deportation of 5 violent criminals with nothing but a vague, undocumented comment in court, no one said a word. Not the press, not the politicians, not even the Department of Justice. But Pam Bondi said enough for the entire country. She stepped up to the podium in Tallahassee alone, no entourage, no script, a sealed folder in her hands, a storm in her eyes. "This is not political," she said. "This is about trust, and that trust has been broken." There was no warm-up, no pleasantries, just a calm, sharp voice and a line that made TV anchors drop their coffee mid-sentence. The room froze. Viewers leaned in because for the first time, someone wasn't just hinting at corruption, she was naming it out loud, on the record. And she wasn't talking about a rogue politician or a shady bureaucrat. She was talking about a man in a robe, a powerful federal judge who had spent years making rulings that shaped national policy, quietly and without question. Until now. What Bondi held in that folder wasn't theory. It was evidence, months of it, and what it revealed was only the beginning. He didn't seek attention, didn't grandstand or give interviews, but in Washington's legal circles, his presence was undeniable. A liberal judge with a sterling resume, Georgetown undergrad, Yale Law, appointed during the Obama years. He was the kind of figure who moved quietly but carried weight behind every decision, not because he was loud but because he was trusted. Over the years, he'd ruled on matters most Americans would never hear about: national security, immigration enforcement, government surveillance. Each time, the outcome seemed calculated, not illegal, not explosive, just convenient for the right people. To many, he was the definition of professionalism, disciplined, reserved, a guardian of process. But to Pam Bondi, that facade had begun to crack. She saw something else behind the composed demeanor, a man who had stopped judging the law and started bending it. She didn't say anything at first. She watched. She waited. And then one Friday evening in D.C., he made a move too bold to ignore. It was late on a Friday, one of those quiet moments in D.C. where no one expects news, just closed offices, weekend plans, and the illusion that the system is asleep. But inside a federal courtroom, the liberal judge issued a verbal restraining order, no paperwork, no written decision, blocking the deportation of 5 foreign nationals, men suspected of ties to a violent Central American gang known for drug trafficking, kidnapping, and mutilation. Even seasoned ICE agents felt uneasy around that name. And yet the judge said they couldn't be removed, not with a legal argument, not with a written opinion, just a verbal comment. Vague. Unclear. Unenforceable. By Monday morning, Homeland Security had already moved forward with deportation plans, interpreting the lack of a signed order as permission. But the press caught wind. Protesters lined up outside ICE offices. Cable news ran half-explained segments all day. The judge stayed silent. Then came the retaliation. He threatened the administration with contempt, accusing them of ignoring a court order. An order that technically didn't exist in writing. Bondi watched the chaos unfold, but to her, this wasn't just legal confusion, it was sabotage. And this wasn't the first time his name had surfaced in cases that quietly disrupted national enforcement efforts. But this time it was different. This time there were lives at stake. And this time, she was ready to act, because behind the scenes, her team had already started gathering threads. And what they were beginning to find, buried in old dockets and encrypted messages, hinted at something much larger than a bad ruling. It hinted at a cover-up. Pam Bondi didn't storm into the spotlight that weekend. She didn't call a press conference or tweet a demand for accountability. She did something far more dangerous. She started making calls. First to senior contacts at Homeland Security, asking pointed questions about the judge's verbal order. Then to legal counsel inside the White House, where she spoke in a closed-door call that, according to someone present, ended with 5 words that stuck: "He's not interpreting the law. He's hiding behind it." But what the public didn't know, not yet, was that Bondi's team had already been working for weeks. They weren't just reacting, they were preparing. Quiet interviews with former court clerks. Unfiled memos from a whistleblower in the D.C. circuit. Encrypted communications between the judge and his former aides, flagged through a side-channel inquiry. Each piece alone meant little, but together they told a different story, one where the courtroom had become a shield, not for justice but for those trying to avoid it. And Bondi, calm and calculated, was no longer asking questions. She was building a case. It started as a folder. Slim. Standard. Nothing flashy. But page by page, conversation by conversation, it grew heavier. Pam Bondi's team wasn't rushing. They moved with precision, like surgeons dissecting a patient no one thought could bleed. Inside the file were internal emails from career officials, timestamps that didn't match court logs, memos never signed but strangely enforced. And then came the messages, encrypted, short, but chilling. One referenced a high-profile immigration case paused without cause. Another hinted that hearing schedules had been adjusted for political convenience. There were names, familiar ones. Too familiar. Everything was still circumstantial, just threads, but Bondi saw the shape they were forming, a quiet pattern of manipulation, a hidden network where decisions weren't just influenced, they were designed. Some of the evidence had been buried so deep it took subpoena-level access to retrieve it. Others had come from people who only spoke off the record, fearful of retaliation. But the weight of it was undeniable. And Bondi knew this wasn't about a bad call on a Friday afternoon anymore. This was systemic. And it was only a matter of time before the system pushed back. It began with a tech lawsuit no one paid attention to. A small watchdog group out of San Diego filed a complaint against former federal officials, alleging they had used encrypted apps, specifically Signal, to coordinate decisions on sensitive government operations without leaving a digital trail. At first, the case barely made a ripple, until it landed in the courtroom of the same liberal judge Pam Bondi was quietly investigating. He had ties to several of the names listed in the discovery process, not just professionally, personally. A former legal consultant, a senior advisor, even a staffer who had clerked under him. But he didn't recuse himself. He didn't even acknowledge the connections. Instead, he kept the case and then sealed it. Closed hearings. Witness list withheld. No press allowed. All under the pretense of national security. To Bondi, this wasn't caution, it was strategy. Her team dug deeper and found that court calendars had been edited. File access logs didn't line up. And key digital records simply vanished. The case, now nicknamed Signalgate, wasn't just about an app. It was about control, about how communication tools meant to protect privacy were now shielding decisions that affected border operations, surveillance policies, and even military oversight. And through it all, the judge stood calmly behind the bench, issuing delays, moving dates, and pushing the hearings further from public view. But what set Bondi off wasn't just the secrecy. It was what came next. One of her tech consultants, working through a third-party data subpoena, recovered partial signal logs from a former DOJ staffer involved in the case. One message, time-stamped 2 months before the case was assigned, read, "They're planning to dump some of it in March, but don't worry, Jay. We've got it covered on our end." The J wasn't named, but Bondi didn't need the name. She read the message twice, then again. Her hands started to shake, because this wasn't about suspicion anymore. This was confirmation. Pam Bondi stared at the message like it might rewrite itself. "Don't worry, Jay. We've got it covered on our end." It was short, vague, almost dismissible. But when you've been watching a man manipulate the law from the bench for months, even subtle language feels like thunder. She paced her office in silence, the message glowing on the screen. It wasn't just that it existed. It was the timing, sent weeks before the Signalgate case was even formally assigned and written by someone with direct access to court scheduling systems. She forwarded it to her senior counsel, no commentary, then walked into a secure meeting room with only 5 other people. A folder lay on the table, slim but heavy because it didn't need volume to be dangerous, just timing, just truth. "What's our threshold here?" someone asked. Bondi didn't blink. "We crossed it 2 weeks ago," she said. Her deputy tried to downplay it. "It could be interpreted a dozen ways. It's not definitive." But she cut him off, calmly but without room for argument. "It's not just this message. It's all of it. The sealed hearings, the redactions, the strategic delays, the rulings without records. It's a pattern, one that was never supposed to be noticed." And then she said the sentence that changed everything inside that room, "I'm not letting this get buried in some inspector general's report 3 years from now." That moment ended the waiting. From that point on, the only thing left was strategy, because Bondi wasn't asking for accountability anymore. She was demanding it. The final 72 hours felt like a storm trapped behind glass. Inside her office, Bondi met with legal strategists, media consultants, and senior advisors, each one carrying the same look, focused but aware of what was coming. No one raised their voice. No one had to. They were preparing not just for a press event, but for an institutional earthquake. 2 nights before the announcement, Bondi called a retired federal judge in Arizona, someone she respected, someone who had seen what power can do behind the curtain. "You sure about this, Pam?" Her answer was instant. "I am." "You'll burn a lot of bridges." "I'm not here to make friends," she said. "I'm here to clean house." She didn't say it with anger. She said it with clarity because she knew what this would cost her, politically, personally. But she also knew what it would cost if she stayed silent. And while the cameras were being positioned and statements were being rehearsed, Bondi reached into her desk drawer, pulled out a letter from months ago, and read it again. The letter was handwritten. No return address. No hashtags. No political slogans. Just ink, emotion, and one mother's heartbreak. It came from Corpus Christi, a mother whose son, a border agent, had been seriously injured during a chaotic operation. 2 men had slipped through the system due to a court-ordered hold, men with ties to a violent cartel. That hold. It came from the same liberal judge Bondi had been watching. "My son can't walk," the letter read. "He served this country with honor, and now he sits in silence because someone in a robe wouldn't show his face." Pam kept the letter in her top drawer, not for politics, not for headlines, but because it reminded her that behind every manipulated decision, someone paid the price. This wasn't just about abuse of power. It was about the consequences no one ever sees, the injuries, the trauma, the families left behind while the courtroom lights dim and the paperwork disappears. So when people would later accuse her of making it personal, they weren't entirely wrong. It was personal, but not out of spite. Out of duty. Because someone had to speak for those who couldn't stand anymore. The press room was packed. Cameras clicked. Screens lit up. But when Pam Bondi walked in, the noise stopped. She wasn't there to speculate. She wasn't there to tease. She was there to name. "We believe this judge knowingly interfered with federal investigations, misused his authority to shield select individuals from scrutiny, and compromised the integrity of our justice system." No drama. No fire. Just facts delivered with a calm that made every word land heavier. The documents she released outlined specific charges: obstruction of justice, abuse of judicial authority, willful concealment of evidence, failure to recuse in matters involving known conflicts of interest. Within hours, legal circles ignited. Emergency meetings in law firms. Private discussions among federal judges. Emails with his name being quietly deleted or locked behind restricted access. The nation didn't know what to make of it. Some called it political warfare. Others called it long overdue courage. But Bondi wasn't interested in the noise. Her eyes stayed on the file in her hand because what mattered wasn't the headlines. What mattered was that the system had finally been forced to look at itself. And what came next would make it impossible to look away. A week after the announcement, Bondi's office released a curated batch of internal messages, legally cleared for public review. They weren't classified. They didn't need to be. One email read, "Keep this one in my courtroom. Too risky for another judge." Another, marked personal, hinted at coordinating legal timelines around expected political transitions. On their own, they didn't scream corruption. But together, they painted a picture. Courtroom schedules altered, hearings delayed to benefit favored legal teams, case assignments shifted quietly, strategically. And still the judge said nothing. His office released a single sentence through a clerk: "He has always served with honor and integrity and will respond through the appropriate legal channels." But the silence only fueled the fire. People didn't want formality. They wanted answers. Because for years, this judge had been trusted with some of the nation's most sensitive legal matters. Matters involving national security, immigration enforcement, even digital privacy. And now the same public who had never known his name was asking if his courtroom had been used to protect power instead of challenge it. Bondi didn't gloat. She didn't posture. She simply pointed to the documents and said, "This is what accountability looks like." But even then, no one was ready for what came next. Because the judge wasn't just being accused anymore. He was being summoned to court. He didn't enter through the main doors. U.S. Marshals brought him in through a side hallway, far from the flashing cameras and protest signs. The man who once presided over national security cases with closed chambers and sealed files now stood before another judge as a defendant. His black suit was pressed. His face was not. He looked pale, worn, eyes sunken, jaw tight. The courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia, was packed. No theatrics. No grand speeches. Just the reading of charges in a flat, clinical tone. Obstruction of justice. Willful concealment. Abuse of judicial authority. The once revered judge pled not guilty. Outside, the crowd was split. Some shouted in support of Bondi. Others held signs accusing her of attacking the judiciary. But beneath the noise, one question echoed across both sides. Can we still trust the people behind the bench? Because this wasn't just about one man anymore. This was about the robe he wore and what it represented. And as the trial began, America watched, not just to see if he would fall but to find out if the system could stand. There were no dramatic outbursts, no gasps. Just the dull echo of the gavel and the sound of people shifting in their seats. The judge was not found guilty on all counts. Some charges were dismissed, too much redacted evidence, too many erased messages. But two stuck: willful concealment of evidence, misuse of judicial authority. The courtroom stayed silent as the sentence was read. He wouldn't face prison, but he would face the end of everything else. Immediate removal from the bench, permanent disbarment, a formal recommendation for federal review of every national security ruling he had ever touched. He didn't look up. His attorneys offered no comment. Pam Bondi didn't celebrate. She didn't give interviews. She walked back into her office, placed the final report on her desk, and looked out toward the Jefferson Memorial. "That's one," she whispered. Because she knew this wasn't about just one man. It never was. In the weeks that followed, something rare happened. People stopped arguing, just for a moment, not about party lines, not about court politics, but about truth. For the first time in a long time, Americans looked behind the curtain and saw something uncomfortable. Not a grand conspiracy, not villains in shadows, just a system. Deeply human, deeply flawed, and far too used to not being questioned. Pam Bondi gave no victory speeches. She declined national interviews. But one morning, she stood in a quiet lecture hall at the University of Florida, facing a group of first-year law students. No cameras. No podium. Just her voice. "Don't chase headlines," she told them. "Chase the truth. Because if you don't, someone else will write your version of it for you." The room was silent. Some scribbled notes. Others just watched. And across the country, people began asking harder questions. How many rulings were quietly altered? How many decisions had served power, not justice? The Department of Justice didn't announce publicly, but it launched a new internal review process focused on judges. Quietly. Carefully. And this time, someone was watching. Bondi had left a mark, not just on a judge's career but on the institution itself. Because accountability doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, just loud enough to be heard where it matters most. She didn't want a trophy. She didn't need applause. She wanted something far more powerful: presence. A reminder to every courtroom in America that even the highest bench can crack. And when it does, what matters isn't how hard the fall is but whether the rest of us were watching.